Torah time! The weekly portion. What's it all about? It really means something. What can it teach me? Turn it. Everything's in it. Hi, welcome to Torah time. I'm Rabbi Stephanie Shore. Now this week we start a brand new book of the Torah. We are in Vayikra, which in English we know as Leviticus. Now, in this beginning portion of this book, we start to read about sacrifices and the sacrifices that the children of Israel were making at the Mishkan, the portable sanctuary in the desert. When they made these sacrifices, they bring the choicest of their flocks or the choicest part of their grain to make sure that they were giving something completely unblemished to God, to make amends for their sins. Now remember, in Judaism, sin has a different meaning than it does in our sister religions. Sin is an archery term in Hebrew. Chet is the word for sin. And sin in Hebrew, chet, is an archery term that means to miss the mark. So, in archery, you're aiming for the bullseye, but if you miss the mark, they call chet. Now, in a sin, we miss the mark, okay? We have to kind of realign ourselves, get back on track, and do the right thing. But also part of our Jewish tradition is to make amends, to atone for our sins. Now, back in the ancient times, and even until the destruction of the temple, sacrifice was the way that the children of Israel would make amends or atone for their sins. This portion goes into a tremendous amount of detail as to how to make the sacrifice, how to prepare for it, what to do with it. I don't want to go into the details because quite frankly, it's a little gory. The point is that there are a lot of instructions. Now, why do we think that? Well, because when we're making amends or atoning for our sins, it shouldn't be too easy. We gotta work for it to make sure that that act of atonement will propel us into making changes in our behavior so that ultimately we don't have to do it again. Kind of side note, but very interesting when we talk about sacrifices. You may sometimes notice maybe your grandmother or when she's baking challah, or maybe even your mother or father, when they're baking challah, that they take a little piece and they put it at the bottom of the oven and they let that piece burn. That's symbolic of the sacrifice. It's a custom that's carried over thousands of years to where we are today. Also, some people salt their challah. Well, in ancient times, they salted the sacrifice. And so this salting of the challah is also reminiscent of this time of sacrifice in ancient times. It's amazing how our people have kept customs and rituals through thousands and thousands of years. It is a blessing for us today. In the past, sacrifice was the very first Torah portion, the first lesson taught to Jewish children. That seems kind of bizarre, right? I mean, why wouldn't they teach the creation story or the Exodus from Egypt or something really fun like that? No, they taught sacrifice. And when we think about what that might mean for us today, well, sacrifice is really important. Think about this for a second. There are times when we make sacrifices in our lives today. For instance, you're making a sacrifice of your time when you go to regular school and when you come to Hebrew school. But ultimately, that sacrifice is going to benefit you in very, very good ways in your future. But when we think about sacrifice, don't we kind of think that we're giving something up? We're giving up our time, we're giving up our energy, maybe we're giving up our belongings or our money. That might be true. However, The Torah portion is suggesting that when we make worthwhile sacrifices, we can elevate ourselves and we can become closer to God and we can make room in our lives for really good things. The Hebrew word for sacrifice is korban, which means to draw closer. So we do draw closer when we make sacrifices. We don't have sacrifices today. And remember, since the destruction of the temple, we don't participate in these kinds of sacrifices. But when we today do something that isn't so good, when we know that we have done wrong, what do we need to do? We need to sacrifice our pride. We need to sacrifice the part of ourselves that thinks, well, they deserved it anyway. We need to hand those things up to God like the smoke that came from the sacrifice, and we need to go to someone and make amends. When we make amends to someone, do we go to them and say, I'm sorry, I was wrong? Well, we might go that way, but when we go to someone with humility in our heart, with an apologetic heart, and with a desire to make things right, then our amends, our atonement to that person will not only be words that will be kindly spoken, but it will be behavior that we change within ourselves so that we don't have to do the same wrong again. I want to also say that in ancient times, when the people would make these sacrifices, the smell wasn't so good. So they would sprinkle it with frankincense. And they said that that scent would be pleasing to God. And also, when we approach things with a good attitude and with a pleasant countenance, with a pleasant presence, then our amends will be pleasing to the person that we're apologizing to. Sacrifice, making amends, living a good life, all lessons that we find in our Torah, which is ages old, but still so relevant to us today. Well, that's our Torah time. Thanks for stopping by. Shalom.
Torah time, the weekly portion. What's it all about? It really means something. What can it teach me? Turn it. Everything's in it.